Well, welcome to session 17D, Increasing Data Literacy in the Department of Defense. Very interesting title. I'm sure a lot of us are just dying to hear what's going on inside DoD around data literacy. And here to help us with that is someone who needs no introduction to the stage here at MIT, Michael Conlin. And Mike's brought his colleague, Jim, who will be talking and co-presenting with him. In the original blurb for this session, it said that there were going to be two case studies that would be presented, but they've actually got three. So very excited to hear what they have to say. So without further ado, I want to hand over to Michael.
Thank you, Derek, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be back at the CDOIQ. I've been watching every session I could fit into my calendar over the last 2.5 days, and it's a lot of fun. It's a great learning experience. I am going to share some insights, some practical insights with you that are based on our experience, both my experience as the first Chief Data Officer of the Department of Defense and subsequently the first Chief Business Analytics Officer, but also some experience that Jim and I and our firm have together in terms of raising data literacy in the DoD. And we're going to get very practical and very substantive with you, and hopefully that'll be valuable to you. All right, so Jim, if you could start sharing our slides, create a bit of a context for our audience, that'd be great. There's a lot of discussion in the press about the importance of data literacy, and it typically focuses on training. How much training, what's your budget, how are you going to track it, how are you going to encourage people to take the training, how are you going to make certain that you're getting certifications and all that kind of thing. And that's all wonderful, except that it's not a practical approach. If you want to get practical, you need to think of the bigger picture beyond just the data literacy training classes. And we're going to take you through a couple of examples to drive home what we mean. We look at data literacy and the challenge of increasing data literacy as a change management challenge, because you're trying to not just address knowledge and skills, you're trying to change culture, processes, policies, a range of different things. And what we say is, if you're going to, because this is adult learning, we all know that with adult learning, you're dealing with a use it or lose it phenomenon. If you want the training to be useful, you have to reach people when they're ready, willing, and able to absorb and apply that training in their day job. And that's a critical element. It's ready, willing, and able, and we're going to explain how you know they're ready, willing, and able. I'm going to start with the first example. This example comes to you from some work we've done in migrating financial managers in the DoD into software as a service capabilities. And this particular example happens to be from OneStream, but it's the same for any software as a service migration. The challenge here is to pick your timing correctly. Let's start with the before picture for the financial managers. This is a typical month for a financial management professional in the DoD using the old systems, and most of them have old systems. In the upper left-hand corner, you can see there's a set of orange steps that they go through where they're processing actual expenses, and they're still processing those expenses on a manual basis, doing manual checks, analysis, classification, reclassification, and the financial management professionals are spending anywhere between 6 and 8 business days in the month processing those actual expenses. In parallel, you have the blue process where they're prosecuting budget updates. So they're gathering data from across the organization, they're compiling it, they're attempting to merge it, integrate it, try to validate what it tells them, analyze it, and this set of budget-related activities happen in parallel to the expense activities. But these take anywhere between 12 and 17 business days in a typical month. Now, you know, the deadline, you got 21 business days in the average month. So we've already taken a big chunk of that. And what happens is the two processes come together in a set of reconciliation activities and analysis, producing reports. In many cases, these professionals will be producing thousands of PowerPoint slides for review, recommendation, et cetera. The whole sequence is typically on the order of 25 business days. And of course, there's only 21 business days in the month. So what you have then is people that are busier than you can imagine throughout the entire month, with a major surge of activity at the end of the month. Extra hours, business day after business day, over the weekend, et cetera, trying to cram it all in. This is not a conducive environment to introduce data literacy training. Let's actually take a look at what life is like for these human beings during this cycle. So as I laid out for you, what you typically will see, and you'll see when our videos, there we go, they are pulling data from SharePoint, they are pulling data from emails, they're pulling data from authoritative systems. They are attempting to reconcile multiple iterations because these systems sync up at different periodicities and have different degrees of detail and quality in them. They're dealing with all the version control stuff, and they're trying to run this set of processes at the same time as they are coping with a rapidly approaching report deadline at the end of the month. You can imagine that these are incredibly stressed people, extra hours at the end of the month, typically a burnout scenario, even when they're bringing in contractors, which is common. They just burn hour after hour in the month-end cycle, and then they face that month after month after month. These people are not ready, willing, and able to improve their data literacy. So rather than bring data literacy training into that scenario, we coach our customers that instead you need to time it with the introduction of the new software as a service financial management processes. That completely changes because you're addressing the people. You're taking advantage of the changes in the policy and the process and the underlying platform, the software as a service platform. And let me show you what the new process looks like when you have migrated these folks into the software as a service platform. See the banner across the top? That's the model I was showing you before, that prior process model. The new one's at the bottom. We've significantly compressed all of the activities. The long piece of this, the critical path, is the blue budget update cycle. And that ends up being anywhere from 3 to 4 business days, where the green reconciliation step takes place in half a second because it's push of a button through automation. All of that is pulled together, all of that is reconciled, et cetera, in half of a second. What that means now is that the financial management professionals no longer are spending their time crunching through detailed item by item, transaction by transaction data. They're now looking at the aggregate. They're looking at what is the data telling them and revealing, and what do they need to do to act on that data. Typical implementation here, we've taken a 25-day process with that extra bulge at the end of the month. We've compressed it down into a 4 business day process, and typically we've saved them over 6,000 FTE hours of effort a year. Almost as important is this reduction in errors. 88% of the errors are typically resulting from spreadsheets, and we've taken spreadsheets entirely out of the process. And with that, that significant level of error that affects quality. Let's see why this is a better time to introduce data literacy training as you roll out the new system, as you bring your users onto it, because now the world becomes completely different. The software as a service platform, and it's not ours, by the way, software as a service platform is letting them collaborate as professionals to look into the bigger picture of the data. What are the totals? What are the patterns? How can we project forward what's going to happen next, not just what did happen? The more senior financial professionals are able to do scenario planning and what if analysis because the data is readily there. The regression lines are readily available, and they're able to do that detailed geospatial kind of analysis, which means they spend more of their time analyzing, more of their time taking recommendations to management and getting sign-off for changing the way the money is being spent, creating better value for the warfighter and better value for the taxpayer, and ultimately a better experience for the financial management professionals. The whole shift moves you toward what you saw there, less effort, more accuracy, and new functionality like the drill down capability. That, because the timing is done where you've begun the migration, you've incorporated the new system and its data into the actual training. So it's directly applicable to the job of the people being trained. The data literacy rate is much, much higher, much, much more successful, and you have a much happier user experience because you've chosen your timing effectively. Well, that's a critical element of this, and getting people ready, willing, and able to apply their new data literacy knowledge and their new data literacy skills. Now, with that example in front of you, I'm going to turn the camera toward my colleague, James Esselgroth, who's going to take you through two more actual examples, and he's going to show you some real live demonstration of the capabilities that were integrated in the user experience for people in the DoD. James, over to you.
Thank you, Michael. So as we continue our journey along data literacy, we've also worked with asset managers using an operational readiness index what-if tool. And this tool really helped asset managers and senior leaders understand, better understand and answer questions like, if I had $1 to spend, where should I spend it? Do I have a 1 to N list or an integrated priority list? If I've spent that dollar, how can I better understand the second, third, and fourth order effects of those decisions? And so let's go ahead and just dive right into the demo. And we're going to quick orient everyone to what they're looking at very quickly. On the left-hand side, you see some legends, some what-if tools. We'll jump into those in a couple seconds. On the bottom left are some KPIs related to this portfolio. And we used inferential statistics when we built this model to bring in the appropriate values so that we could have and understand the second, third, and fourth order effect of your decisions. As we move around the dashboard itself, we actually have a sand chart up here on the upper left-hand side, which is the operational readiness index on the Y and time along the X. We've bucketized every asset in here into one of these 4 categories of from good to failing. And then we can also see the overall health of the organization, of all the assets aggregated together. And this really operationalizes ISO 55000, which is the asset management ISO. And then our operational readiness index for this demo really breaks down into 2 key variables, which is health and importance. And we can see the progression of that over time, which is in the upper right-hand side. And finally, on the bottom half of the screen, we can also see our time, the relationship of sustainment, deferred maintenance, and deferred maintenance penalty across time down here, which is the total bill needed to right-size your inventory. And finally, I'll call you down to this line down here is the actual amount of money, which is one of many assumptions we built into this algorithm, which is if you give me $512 million today, I'm going to assume you're going to give that to me next year. And so this ultimately helps our leaders be able to better understand what's going on. And so let me go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and move this live. And just as this is calculating, this is a Tableau front end. We're running Python on a TabPy server. And so all these calculations are happening in real time. And what really highlights here is being able to answer those first couple questions that I highlighted earlier of, you know, if I had $1 to spend, where should I spend it? But really, what are our second, third, and fourth order effects of that decision? And so what you'll see here is the charts will all start adjusting based on, I've just now cut my dollars almost in half, beyond half. And so as you would expect, if you take dollars away over time, my portfolio is going to absolutely deteriorate over time. And you'll see that here in a second. And you can already see the upper right one already started to calculate. And like I said, this is happening in real time with the calculations. And as you would imagine, I'm going to lose more operational assets. I'm going to move more of them down into the failing state. You can also see that my budget, my requirement over time will significantly increase upwards to $19 billion is my total requirement out into the out years. Conversely, if I were to go ahead and take these things and move it to doubling what I had before and go into about a little over 3% of my asking for more dollars, which is about $1 billion, you would expect to see things be able to improve over time. And this, again, is all happening live with Python in the background. Now, this becomes really important for the senior leader to really understand what's going on with the data and the algorithm. So it no longer becomes a real black box as much as it is provide the transparency and the confidence to the senior leader on what's going on with the decisions that are being made and painted in front of them right now. And one last element I'd like to bring to your attention is we brought in a sensitivity analysis capability in here as well, so that senior leaders may feel like this is too rosy of a picture and they want to be able to increase those things. So I can add a little deferred maintenance penalty, which really translates to a little bit more realism based on the subjectivity of the senior leader themselves. And you'll see that recalculate here in a second. So it'll provide a little bit more based on this subjectiveness. It'll start to deteriorate the assets in a little bit, and you'll see that over time. Now, the other element is, while this is building, and I'm going to bring it to a second sheet, is answering the 1 to N list, or the integrated priority list, and how the algorithm begins to choose what it's executing in terms of dollars. And I'm going to bring you to your attention now. So on this chart, you can start to see the upper half of the chart here is showing you a scatter chart every year where the x-axis is important, the y-axis is health, and the green dots up here, just as the green lines down here, are those items that are above the cut line. If you gave $1 million and have $1 million worth of requirements, then everything could be funded. But many of the time that doesn't happen. And so you end up with my amount of money can only go so far, and which assets should I spend those on? So it really gets after that question of, if I had $1 to spend, where should I spend it? And being able to see how that is choosing, the algorithm is providing a recommendation. So you can see that in the upper half. The lower half of the screen is the actual integrated priority list, or the 1 to N list. And the same thing, the greens are above the cut line and the grays are below the cut line. And you can see over time how the algorithm is choosing what it is choosing. And this, again, really reinforces and increases the data literacy of these senior leaders, because they're now be able to understand what's going to happen year over year. And if I increase dollars, it'll allow more assets to be fixed over time. And so this is one aspect, working with asset managers. We're going to go ahead and pivot now to another group within that we've also worked with within the Defense Department. And so this organization was challenged with not looking at data from a specific functional community, but really integrating the data so that they can have a holistic picture. And so I'm going to show you the common operating picture. I'm going to also walk you through the data health dashboard. And a way to think about this is that if I had a coin and the coin was data, on one side of that, I'm making decisions with that data, and that's where the common operating picture. But on the opposite side of the coin is how I want to be able to have confidence in that data. And so I also have the data health dashboard. And as we worked with this agency, they got very excited about the data to make decisions, but then it led them to go to ask questions of, well, how good is that data? So it allows them to have at least some level of confidence in that data. And as a personal experience, I've had several senior leaders come up to me in conversation on, Jim, I've got maybe 50% of the information for me to make a decision. And very rarely do I have the understanding of the second, third, and fourth order effects of that decision and how it's going to ultimately help them, and the confidence that they need to be able to make even with the 50% of information. And so I'm going to jump right into now the first half of this visual on the front side of the coin. And so this dashboard here in the common operating picture, so this is an operational dashboard with sanitized data for demonstration purposes. And this looks like a lot of dashboards that many of us have probably seen. We've got some KPIs on the left-hand side. We have some change over time related to funding, being able to plan versus actual. Maybe I've got missions or shipments that I'm trying to track with a goal of month over month, what I'm trying to do, where those shipments or missions are happening on the planet. And then in terms of achieving strategic objectives, how well am I doing as an organization to do that? And one of the key elements of what you're looking at here was bridging and breaking down the silos of data and looking for a way for us to be able to bridge horizontally across that data so that we can drill down and be able to ask, not just at an organizational level, how well are we doing, but at the next level down. So for instance, if I were to look at the next level down in this data set and filter it down, I can now take a look at that data at that level. And so now I've focused in on a sub-level of the organization to see how well are they performing, what are they doing, and be able to ask better questions. Well, one of the elements that we did is we went along this journey, and as most of us in our data journey, when you see data like this, it starts to beg, this is awesome, giving us insight and be able to drill down, but how can we pivot this to performance metrics, or how can we turn this into our ability to make actionable insights with this data? And so I'm going to show you the performance metrics that we ended up creating for this agency. And so in the upper left-hand side is you see our overall score, which is, if that's a macro metric, these four here, missions, finances, staffing, and objectives, it's a straight average. And we did that for the demonstration purposes here. Out of the month-over-month scoring that you see down here, or one of them is on a quarterly basis because that's how it's reported. And then on the left-hand side, you can also see at the directorate level what's going on and how well their performance is going. I'm going to bring your attention to this middle one right here, this month-over-month metric, because this was really near and dear to one of the senior leaders, an admiral. And the admiral that we were talking to really wanted to not only know how well am I performing, and so you may recall that burn up chart, so to speak, that we had on the first, also have how well am I actually performing in each of those months for the number of missions. And you see those different ones are the bars here. And this is great insight, but it still doesn't provide the maximum context that the admiral was really looking for, which is how well have I been performing historically in that month during that time, because 18% to 100%, that might be on par, or is this really that bad? So how well am I actually been doing historically? And so as you can see, these circle dots that are in here actually represent the historical elements. And I'll tell you, we brought the admiral literally to tears. He absolutely, this was what he's been looking for quite a few years, was trying to answer that question. And so as you can see here, the insight is that on this particular one in the month of October, and because we're working with the Defense Department, they operate under the fiscal year. So the beginning of their calendar year is 1 October. And so in this example, it allows the leader to now ask questions on, we've been operating and executing at 18, on average about 28%. We did 18% this month. Well, that actually is pretty close to that versus 100%. But now it really drives from a data literacy perspective. The leader can now go, is 20% the right goal? Or why am I having a gap in this question? Is it the distribution of funds from on high for me to be able to execute? Is the lagging ability for me to execute my mission being held up by those dollars? Or is it something else entirely? But now with this understanding, the leader can now ask far better questions when they're going to look for this information. So let me go ahead and move out of this. So as the leader was making these decisions and taking a look at it, he started asking, this is great, but I want to learn and understand about the data itself, and ultimately, what are we trying to do as an organization as it relates to the health of that data? And so this dashboard, now we're on the opposite side of the coin, and we're taking a look at the data itself. How complete is that data in this first KPI? How consistent is that data? We brought in some other KPIs, like what are we totally looking at here? How many total systems do I have in here? How many tables, columns, and records, with some other significant KPIs in here as well. I want to bring your attention now to this bottom chart and take a look at this. And you'll notice that it zoomed in from 50 to 100 for completeness on the y-axis and 80 to 100 on consistency along the x-axis. Each dot here is a table of those 95 tables you saw a second ago. And it's colored by the average of completeness and consistency. They're both on a 0 to 100 scale, and they're sized by the quantity of records within them. Now, as I look at this, my goal is trying to push everybody to the upper right so that everybody's completely green. And if they were in the bottom left, as they get further away, they're going to be in the dark red down at the 0, 0. Now, as a leader and I'm making a decision, I can come in here and I can take a look, and maybe this table here is, maybe this is related to the questions or the decisions I'm making. And I'm taking a look at this and I can start to ask questions on, well, why am I only at 60% complete or 80% consistent? Does it matter really to my decision? Because as a senior leader, I can choose to do something about it, or I can choose to do nothing and take that risk of doing nothing moving forward. Because sometimes you don't have the time, as I described earlier, they don't have, some of the senior leaders just don't have the time to go in and do the root cause analysis on the why, because they have to make a decision in nanoseconds. And so they can do what they can do, but they can at least framework the confidence associated with that decision as they're looking at this data. And now I moved one layer deeper into this discussion. And real quick, you can see up here the 3 different systems and how well they're doing in completeness. You can see how many total tables and records are for each of those different systems.
Michael, can you tell James to pause and rejoin the Zoom? We've lost his video
one to
feed.
end the list of all of the tables from based on completeness, least complete on top to most complete on the bottom.
Oh, wrong.
I just lost it.
So I'm a little concerned because it looks like we've lost the video feed as I look at this as a participant. While we bring that back, what I'd like to do, Derek, is I see that we've gotten a couple of questions, and I'd like to start answering some of the questions that people have raised. One of those questions was, how can you establish data governance as an enterprise capability rather than an IT-driven initiative? And the simple practical answer to that question is by measuring data governance from a business impact perspective. Now, when we get the video feedback up, I'm going to ask Jim to go to the earlier page in this particular demo, because what we were showing in that is mission success, the number of missions successfully completed. That is the fundamental measure of outcomes for this particular agency. And by tying the data governance, the appetite for good quality data to the business impact measure, outcomes completed, this became not an IT project. This became a mission outcomes project for the agency involved. And that was the same technique that I used from a overall chief data officer of the DoD perspective, and that I do with others. It's always start the data governance by talking about mission outcomes or business outcomes, not by talking about data governance. As we all know, data governance is housekeeping, and you got to do it, and you got to do it right. But that's not the thing to talk about as a data professional. The thing to talk about as a data professional is, how am I enabling the business to be more successful? In the language of the DoD, how am I enabling the higher level of mission completion performance and getting that aligned with the usual seasonality of mission completion performance? So I can see Jim's dashboard, his live dashboard there again. Another element of enterprise capability is the tie to the financial execution. There's a significant measure of success in every enterprise, and so forth. So the way you establish it as data governance as an enterprise capability is by tying everything back to the mission and showing how the data is contributing and the analytics are contributing to the achievement of the mission. So I'm gonna hand it back to you to finish your discussion of this, and then we've got some more questions we'll answer.
Outstanding. Thank you, Michael. So as I was mentioning, this one-to-end list allows the senior leader to really understand and have confidence in their decision, or at least understanding when they're making a decision, what's going on with that data. And if they are the owner of the people that would be responsible for ensuring that the product information is being loaded, they can either apply resources to this or choose not to. And it's all dependent on your organization and where your what works best for you and your organization. And so now I'm going to pivot back over to.
Wow, Before you leave this, you want to help the people, our viewers, appreciate the horizontal bar chart you've got over there on the right-hand side of your screen. Might be worth explaining a minute because it actually relates to some of the questions people are asking about the value of data governance and the benefits of data governance.
Absolutely. So I've zoomed in now on that bar chart that we were just talking about. And you can see that, well, one is we wanted to end it like a second ago regarding the size and how well they're filled and they're colored. So we can start to, that color scheme brings to attention and does it by exception as it relates to this data. And as it relates to the data governance side of things, it allows the governance process to take a look and analyze those tables. And are those tables related to the key decisions that we're bringing into, say, the common operating picture, like I showed you a second ago? Because not all data needs to be pulled in. And so you can be very pointed and specific in those areas. And the data governance process can go through and actually assess whether these tables are appropriate for that decision-making process, which then leads down a whole list of other questions as it relates to whether we want to continue to bring in this data, if it's not valuable to us, do we want to apply due resources to it? And then, of course, other elements on, is that data from a standardization perspective across maybe multiple functional communities that are siloed and we're bringing that data together, because maybe I want to reduce duplication. And so maybe I'm finding those things as well, and maybe that's why. But this presentation of information allows the senior leader and other leaders to be able to ask these questions that before they just couldn't do before.
Excellent. Thank you, Jim.
Absolutely. So let me pivot back over to our presentation.
Excellent. So we had a couple more questions, Jim, and what I'd like to do is answer them before I take on this next slide. One of the questions is, how do you define and measure data governance outcomes? It's a really good question. And the first step in defining and measuring data governance outcomes is adoption. Can you actually see that people are coming into these dashboards, looking at the data? Which data are they looking at? How much time are they spending looking at that data? And that's the initial measure of success. Because if they're not looking at it, then they're not getting any value out of it. The second is, are they asking for ways to improve the quality of data? A moment ago, Jim was showing you the horizontal bar chart where there was good data quality in green and lesser data quality in yellow. The question becomes is, how good is good enough data to make decisions on? And do we need to improve the data quality for those data sources that he was showing you in yellow? Or can we make good enough decisions today? So when you begin to see an appetite for improving data quality in an aggressive way or increasing data sources, that's another way of measuring the effectiveness of your data governance. And then the next most important way is, are they making visible decisions in the systems based on that new data that they didn't have before? So if you go back to the example I showed you of moving financial management professionals into a software as a service suite, one of the values of that is we can actually see what person in what role in a workflow is using the data or not using the data, and are they acting on that data by putting decisions into the system to reclassify, retreat data, make new recommendations, perform those what-if analysis and scenario planning. You can actually see the activity, and that is the most fundamental measure of user adoption. If they're not interested in or not making decisions, you've failed. If they're not getting an appetite for better quality data, you probably have room for improvement. If they're not even looking at data quality measures, you've really failed because you've not created enough of a literacy for them to have that active appetite for more data or for better quality data. So we define and measure outcomes from the business outcome first, and then we work our way back into the data quality, data literacy, and data consumption itself. So that's my answer to your question. The prior question is, can you give us some examples of how the benefits of data governance initiatives can be quantified and measured over time? And that's progress against those improvements I was just describing. If your organization makes the investment in sending additional people to the data literacy training, if your organization makes the investment in improving data quality for critical business decisions, those are examples of the benefits of the actual data governance initiatives, right? Those are how you're going to measure it. Now, we did have an earlier question about how data literacy can assist the executive arm of government in sub-Saharan Africa in combating insecurity. And I'm going to ask the person who raised that question to clarify in the chat what they mean when they're talking about insecurity. Are they talking about military security, food insecurity, economic insecurity, something else? So would love to have clarity on that. In the meantime, what I want to do is turn back to the slide you see in front of you. When we launched into this, I said to you, data literacy is not just about putting people through classes. That's actually a great way to waste a lot of money. Data literacy, or success at data literacy, is about picking your moment so that the audience is ready, willing, and able to learn and then apply that learning. That means timing is everything. There's no sense in putting people into a training class if they're not going to be able to go back on the job and apply it, either because they don't have enough time, or they don't have the tools, or you're not serving up the data, or whatever it happens to be. But if they don't get the chance to go back and apply it, in a couple of weeks, they will have forgotten everything that they were exposed to in that class. Second element of ready, willing, and able is making sure you're talking their language. That means everything in the training class has to be in the language of the audience. So if I'm delivering data literacy training to those financial management professionals, all of the examples and exercises are on financial management content, transactions, budget items, et cetera. If I'm going to people in that agency that Jim was showing you, then we're talking about the mission, the staffing for those missions, the travel, the equipment that they take, the forensic equipment that they take into the field, those kinds of elements, the types of data that they're generating through, say, biological and DNA testing. You've got to talk their language in the class so that they care. It's got to relate to their job. And finally, training classes alone aren't enough. It's got to fit in with the rest of the routine and the rest of the day job. So the overall comment I have for you is, as I say here, your audience has to be ready, willing, and able. So you've got to pick your timing, you've got to tune your content, and you've got to integrate it into the larger digital transformation that might be going on, all anchored around mission outcomes for the organization. Let me see, what I want to do is spend just a minute helping you understand why we're able to bring this different perspective to the conversation, and then we'll answer the next set of questions that have popped up. There are three, so this falls under the banner of, and now for a word from our sponsor. There are three things that make us different at Definitive Logic. Our people is the very first one. And with that in mind, let me show you some of our people. Jim, would you please play the video? And folks, you'll notice that mantra, powering mission outcomes at the edge of technology. We do begin and end with our customers' outcomes because that's what's utterly critical. The second thing that makes us really different is our set of credo principles. These are a simple set of guides of how to behave in our interaction with each other and with the customers that we serve. We codify this, we help every person that joins us learn these behaviors, and we all work to practice these behaviors every single day. And they are simple, practical approaches. Above all, at the peak of the pyramid is delivering for customers. And so when I began my answers to the question by talking about mission outcomes and business outcomes, that's what we attempt to deliver for our customers every single day. But we're very practical about how to work effectively and deliver those insights, fact-based insights that I've been sharing with you so far. The third thing that makes us different is our org chart. And you're not going to see an org chart like this very many places. At the top of the org chart is our customer-facing people, the folks that are writing code every day, the folks that are talking to customers every day, the folks that are delivering those dashboards every day. Those are at the top of the pyramid, the top of our org chart. They're served by the C-suite, people like me as the Chief Technology Officer, in turn served by our board of directors. It's all about putting our resources behind the folks that enable our customers to be successful every single day. Those three things make us quite different and put us in a position that we focus on the outcomes that we were talking about. So now, Jim, we've got a handful of additional questions that have come up, and let's go through those. For the next question, how can you shift data governance from a compliance-driven grudge process to an initiative that's contributed to the business strategy? That's actually very similar to the answers I've been giving you before. You start by tying it to business outcomes, and that means having conversations with the business people. It does not mean having your analysts, your data engineers, your data scientists beavering away in a vacuum. It means putting them out with the business decision makers and working in an agile, that's an uppercase A, agile approach, where your focus is on what are the mission impacts or mission outcomes we need to deliver. And then building your data governance, people, process, platforms, policies, all around those. So you're not going to go out and drift net all the data. There's no value there. It's not about creating a massive data lake. There's no value in that. It's not about telling people that here's a whole bunch of standards you have to comply with. There's no value in that, and you never get that done. It's about figuring out, how do I help the organization achieve its business goals in a specific, measurable way? And then how do I help the executives manage the achievement of those goals by answering critical business questions? And you build your data governance to enable exactly that, answering critical business questions from executives. The next question on that list is, here we go. We got some new questions down here. And we got clarification on the earlier one. How can data governance and intelligence be deployed to assist military operations in sub-Saharan Africa? Okay, well, this is going to be an interesting thing for us to answer because we can either confirm or deny, as the saying goes, that we have direct personal insight to those kinds of things in the DoD. So let's talk about a hypothetical situation. How can data governance and intelligence be deployed to assist military operations? I think that the most critical starting point is situational awareness. How do you provide the operational commanders with live situational information from a variety of sources? This is not just what do the satellites say about deployed military forces on the ground. It's what do they tell you about economic resources as well, where the water reservoirs are, how good the harvest is going to be, how strong the infrastructure is to get the harvest to market so that the people in that region are getting their basic human needs met. It's about monitoring what's happening in social media because a tremendous amount of direct political information is available in social media today, and pulling on that gives you a live sense of the communities that the military operations are surrounded by or are taking place in. And so you need to think beyond just what the military might have or the security apparatus might have. In one governmental body, you also need to think beyond just military. You need to think about these economic and social issues. In the narrower military space, you do have to have a joint view. Whoever operates any place typically won't operate alone. They'll have allies, they'll have security partners, and now you need a joint view that reflects that larger picture and enables you to share the intelligence in that larger picture. So data governance in a joint environment becomes incredibly sophisticated. You have to be able to apply law in the policies about access to data. Who's allowed to ask a certain type of question and when and from what device? Who's allowed to, what source is allowed to provide the answer to a certain type of question from a certain party in a certain role in a workflow on a certain device at a certain time of day. Incredibly complicated and sophisticated access policies that you have to put in place because nobody operates independently in the modern world. Everybody has security partners. Everybody has folks that they're either gathering information from or sharing. And you have to be cognizant of the law at all times. As an example, the United States military is not permitted under law to hold data around American citizens, nor is the United States military permitted to hold data about foreign nationals. The intelligence community does that. So you have to be very disciplined about who's allowed to hold the data in the first place, how long they're allowed to hold it, who they're able to share that with. And for instance, if a person of interest in sub-Saharan Africa from a military perspective, if a foreign intelligence service has been gathering data on that individual and they share it with the US, that's legal until that person happens to enter the US, in which case it's no longer illegal for the US intelligence community to hold that data. They have to drop that data. So these are very complicated legal requirements that have to be handled. And data governance is the only answer. Highly automated data governance is the only way to do that effectively and with auditability, which is another data governance matter. Jim, is there anything you'd like to add to my comments on that?
Oh, no, you hit the nail on the head, Michael.
Okay, all right. So if you weren't able to hear Jim because of his mic, he managed not to add anything to my answer. Well done, Jim. All right, Derek, I think we've touched on the questions that I can see in the window. Have I overlooked any that you're aware of?
Mike, I don't think so. I think you and Jim have handled most of them. There was one just.
I apologize, Derek. I apologize. I had the sound turned down. Could you repeat that, please?
Okay, just the penultimate question here was, how can you shift data governance from a compliance-driven grudge process to an initiative that is a contributor to the business strategy?
Okay, thank you, Derek. And the answer to that question is that you start with the business strategy when you design your data governance processes and mechanisms. Everything gets anchored in the business strategy, the target performance measures for the organization for the period you're in and the next period and the next period after that. Look, business strategy is ultimately about saying yes to a few things and no to a lot of things. And if the focus of your data governance is how do I enable the organization to execute on those few things it has said yes to, then you aren't going to go wrong. And you're going to get the backing of the organization's business executives. Ultimately, you want people to comply rather than have to be forced to do things. That phrase, a compliance-driven grudge process. Well, we want people to be enthusiastic about data quality and about data governance because they recognize that it helps the business be successful in executing its strategy and achieving its outcomes. which means that everything in the data governance space has to be designed around the business strategy, and you have to be able to clearly tie all of your requirements to those specific benefits. Because if you can't measure the benefit as a data professional, you can be sure nobody else in the organization is going to be able to benefit. So you got to start from the business strategy and design your governance processes around that. Now, if you folks saw the Monday panel discussion that Mark Crisco led with Greg Little and others, you will have heard that kind of theme in the answers from Greg Little. If you saw Tricia Austin from Deloitte and her comments about ethics, it again gets tied to the organization's business strategy. So Mark Crisco yesterday is talking about the acquisition middle tier. Again, that's all about the business strategy for the organization. And I've seen several other presenters throughout the 2.5 days to date addressing that same thing. It's get focused on the business strategy when you start, and always talk about how you're enabling that business strategy to be successful. In the end, that's what's going to resonate with everybody in the organization.
Mm-hmm. Well put, very well put. Now, Jim, any other thoughts on any of the other questions that have been raised and discussed from your side?
One thing to add to Michael's latest comments is just the example that I was walking through when we're talking to the senior leader on the common operating picture. And the more excited that individual got as it relates to the use of that data and understanding the data health, automatically they become almost, for lack of a better phrase, an evangelist. And they want to get excited and move those things in there and figure out, now that they can see this data really help them, they want to be able to then insert and help apply where appropriate into the governance process. So it's not so much a grudge as much as it is they're now bought in and they want to help out and figure out how they can then contribute to the overall organization. And that'll be my final bit on adding to that. But yeah.
Nice.
You know, if I could build on that comment for a second here. We know the signs of organizations that are genuinely data-driven, and the signs of organizations that only claim to be data-driven. And if you went out and you did open a browser and pick the search engine of your choice and do a search on data-driven, you will find hundreds of thousands of mission statements and vision statements that mention the phrase data-driven. And that's where it ends. They don't actually follow through. The reality is, you can tell when an organization has become data-driven by way of, first, their consumption of data literacy and their level of data literacy, but then second, their readiness to make rapid investments in specific new types of data and specific new types of perspectives to get more value out of their data. We know you can mathematically measure cognitive diversity in data science protocols and projects. We know that you can mathematically measure cognitive diversity in your team. And organizations that are genuine data literacy are making investments in improving both the diversity of the algorithms they apply and the diversity of the data they are marshaling to make decisions on. Because there's such a thing as too much of a good thing, but most organizations are nowhere near there. Most organizations have too little diversity of algorithms and views and too little diversity of data to represent the real world. And so another measure of your success in this world is the readiness, not just for you to sponsor new data sources, but for the business users to come to you and say, hey, when can we go get this data? When can we go get that data? When can we include these other players in the decisions that we're making in our data science world? How do we strengthen the data governance? Because I'm really unhappy as a user with the quality of that data I'm using to do my job. These are the kinds of conversations you want your users to be coming to you and having, because they are significant measures that you've moved out of a compliance-driven grudge process to something that is actually successful, and you've inculcated data literacy in the organization. You've changed the culture of the organization so that it's not just phrases anymore.
Yep, absolutely. That's when you know you're really winning. You know, you're not necessarily going to get there straight away out of the gate, for sure. It takes going back and applying all the right kind of rigor and principles that you guys have been sharing with us. Very interesting, those 3 case studies that you shared with us and the detail behind it. So thanks for doing that. You know, so often in presentations, people talk sort of glibly about certain things, but you guys really dived into the depths of things and showed us actual examples. So that was really, really insightful and useful. Thank you to both of you for that.
You're welcome, Derek. Thank you for the feedback.
Yeah, and you know, as seen by all the participation, all the questions and stuff that we've been getting in, it's been a really engaging topic, a really engaging presentation as well. So thanks to the audience for the questions. And, you know, it doesn't stop here. I mean, there are plenty of opportunities through the Hoover platform to continue the conversation in the various topics that have been raised. And certainly you can always DM you know, either Mike or Jim, and, you know, I'm sure they'd be more than happy to respond and to get involved in further discussions about a number of these issues. So I guess with that, I don't see any more questions flooding in there at this time. So we've got like 3 minutes to go. Why not end on a high note? Thank you so much, gentlemen. And thank you to the audience. This has been most interesting.
Thank you, Derek. Thanks to everybody in the audience.